Hail to you exhibitionary forces of YouTube, I'm Jonathan, also known as Pc Genie, and today we'll be talking about my trip to Leeds and when I went to the Royal Armouries. Now, in terms of how much it's got in your exhibits, it focuses specifically on arms and armour, and I mean it's certainly got a lot in there. I mean, for the museum that I'd count as second place in terms of how many pieces of weapons and armour and other military I'd had, that second place museum wouldn't even have an eighth as much as I saw in the Royal Armouries, so it's incredibly impressive. It's literally a large building that requires several floors filled to the brim with many exhibits stuffed with antique items and a couple of reproductions and other items, including interactive displays as well, so you can feel a bit of reproduction mail armour. Things like I took a picture with some gauntlets on that were made, for you to try on and have pictures taken with, and those sorts of things. So it was very good in that sense. Plenty of choice, plenty of items. Now in terms of the types of periods they cover, of course the biggest focus is on medieval arms and armour, as well as Renaissance ones. But you also see items from the Napoleonic era, the sort of colonial times with things like pirate and red coat type of gear, those sorts of things, and even things like more modern equipment, so things from the 1900s and onwards, including things like I saw a Walther PPK, Mauser, the pistol with that broom handle style on it, and various other items as well. And I got plenty of close-ups on items like brigandine, so proper sort of jacks of plates, and, well, like I say, just tons of items and plenty of choice all around, so absolutely perfect really in that sense. Beyond that, like I say, there were interactive exhibits, so you could touch certain reproduction items and you'd get a voice narration that tells you more about the item rather than you sitting there and guessing. Of course, it's pretty much along the lines that you'd expect in a museum. You're not going to expect every single bit of detail ever about these items. It needs to keep the whole thing interesting, so they'll give you a quick summary of these types of items, like say a two-handed sword, and how they'd be used to combat against people out of armour and in armour. But saying that, although you'd think, oh, that's pretty typical then, there were actually exhibits including where we had some people who were from historical European martial arts, like myself, who were actually doing active displays of the techniques. They were specifically doing techniques from Talhofer's treatises, I do believe, and it was interesting. I had a chat with them afterwards. It was great, and they were showing different techniques. Of course, they were doing it in a theatrical style, to sort of exaggerate and demonstrate more clearly what was going on, but the actual techniques and the reasons why and their explanation and the delivery was very charismatic, and the details were perfectly there. Because I have seen on places like YouTube videos where you see people trying to say, oh, this is how a sword is used, or using bows and things, and actually you can kind of tell they don't really know what they're talking about, whereas these guys actually did. So again, it was very impressive. Beyond that, there are also other items. There's a cafe and things to have meals. There was a shop. There were certain items of arms and armour you could actually buy for yourself if you wanted. Personally, I wouldn't recommend getting them because they'd be things like helmets and breastplates and things which aren't properly tailored and fitted, so they wouldn't work properly. But if you wanted something like some kind of wall hanging item, then they'd be great, and it's nice having those things as well. And apart from that, I was even able to go and do some crossbow shooting. Paid about £3, which isn't much even in British money, and got about 8 shots. Very nice having a go of a crossbow because I love my projectile weapons. I've tried slings, bows, even did things like skeet shooting with a shotgun at one time, but I've not really had many chances to try out crossbows, and I got that chance, and yeah, it was fun. Even got a little sticker to say, yeah, I hit gold once. Actually, it was a couple of times, but anyway. So yeah, there was that. Beyond that, in terms of the actual exhibits themselves, there were plenty of items that gave food for thought. If you've ever seen Lindy Beige's channel, you'd see he had a sort of plated mail. So from the Orient, there was a whole Oriental section in a museum, and you actually did get to see the sort of, I can't remember where it's from, sort of India sort of area, but anyway, they had plated mail which was authentic from the period, with very sort of thick gauge wire and properly riveted rings, and they're attached to plates. And you could see the designs on the relevant sort of mannequins or whatever displays, and you can see how it all works together, and you can see the similarities to European equivalents, but also the differences. And it was, again, it was really fascinating to see how they all designed their armours and the little subtleties in them as well. And it was even in the Oriental displays, it went from places like the Middle East and India all the way to places like feudal Japan, so you get to see things like, if you like, samurai, you know, naginata, katana, and things like the, you know, I can't remember the names, I'm not expert in those areas, but the types of armour you'd see from things like the Edo period and the rest, all of that's there. So again, plenty of choice, and I found it quite fascinating, again, seeing different designs, and I took plenty of pictures and close-ups of things like kettle helmets, barbutes, bassinets, and things like sallet helmets, and you could see the designs, which were, you know, very detailed, and clearly they must have been searching quite well for these types of items, because in some museums you see small parts or fragments of arms and armour which are all rusted, they're crumbled, and they have to take little bits and make a jigsaw puzzle out of them. If you've ever been to the museums, you'd probably know what I mean, where you get little pottery shards and they go, oh, this bit and this bit, and then it might look sort of like this, whereas in the Royal Armouries they had actual intact full items, which was amazing. Beyond that, there are even examples of armour from people like Henry VIII, as in that incredible suit of armour that NASA based their spacesuits on. Yes, that one. This crazy spectacled helmet with giant horns coming out of it and all sorts, which is actually, it's such an iconic piece, it's even on the road signs going up to place. And apart from that, you've got other items from other sorts of, you know, people who were quite well off in the nobility, with gilding, fine engravings. In fact, the only problem I'd say was the fact that maybe I wasn't able to take the best of pictures because the light was starting to reflect off the glass, but seriously, if you're there to see it properly, it was fantastic. You could just get a close-up and, you know, all of the fine details. It must have taken these people many months to take every little leaf and pattern and put it in there. So yes, suffice it to say, I'm very impressed with that. And like I say, with the exhibit, these sort of active and interactive exhibits as well, if you're someone who isn't like myself, who's bought mail armour or doesn't even want to get into stuff like reenactment or, you know, HEMA, but still wants to get an idea of what mail feels like, how heavy such items of armour are, and just to, you know, try a pair of gauntlets on for yourself, again, you've got those various interactive exhibits and you can try these items. Even if you're obviously not going to have a try of those gilded pieces of armour for King Henry VIII too much. I mean King Henry VIII, I mean King Henry VIII. So yeah, beyond that, in terms of the Renaissance exhibits, there are plenty of things like lobster pot helmets, the munitions grade breastplates, and things like the long firearms. And one of the things I noticed actually was, I know that your older firearms like muskets and arquebuses were longer because they were smoothbore. This was before rifling was invented. But when I actually saw them up close, it was incredibly impressive how long they were. I mean, genuinely, I saw these, you know, muskets and things that were as long as spears. And I mean, probably about 6-7 foot tall. Must have been incredibly difficult to hold, bearing in mind they would be front heavy with the iron barrels, of course. And yet, they still seem to be used often on a battlefield. So that's something I noticed. Another key item I saw there that was very much worth noticing was, this was something I mentioned in one of my previous videos about brigandine, that apart from the fact that you have brigandine as in several plates riveted to a you know, cloth item like a jacket, you've got bits on the limbs as well. I mentioned that there are certain designs of things like hats and helmets, and I did notice there was a hat which looked like a standard fashionable Renaissance hat, but inside were plates riveted in, and it also was designed to look very similar to the jacket plates underneath it. So that goes to show that there were definitely styles of helmet which were in that brigandine style, which I didn't really know for sure before. Again, I was just guessing really, whereas now I could confirm, yes, there really were brigandine hats and helmets. Beyond that, I also noticed, when I was looking at the mail, the Renaissance and medieval chainmail, as you like to call it, armour, I was also noticing just how thick the rings were. When you look at reproductions, apart from the fact that the sort of diameter, the gap, inside the circle of the ring is obviously quite big on modern reproductions, the actual wire itself is also much thinner. In fact, it was hard to really see much, through the gaps in the rings because it was all so tightly packed together. It was still clearly going to be very flexible, so if you wore it, you wouldn't be restricted because of all the rings pivoting about. But the actual stretch, so to speak, how far apart those rings can go, it looked like there was barely any give at all, which that was another thing that took me by surprise because I'd never really seen proper authentic mail up close before. So again, more things that you think that you know these things, but you just more surprises are in stock for you. Beyond that, like I say, I mean, let's be honest, there are just too many exhibits to talk about. I took so many pictures, but there are all sorts of surprising items like police swords. Yeah, I know that should be an oxymoron, shouldn't it? I mean, the police, less than lethal. We like to arrest people rather than murder them, but apparently not. There are police swords. And there are various items in the hunting range, so there were various crossbows, and also items like different firearms as well. One interesting design I saw was, you normally see stereotypically shotguns are things like pump action items, and rifles might be bolt action, breech loading, or maybe lever action. But I saw pump action or pump loaded rifles, which was interesting. I'd never seen one of those before. So again, if you are at all interested in arms and armour, you're pretty much set. You go into the museum, there's bound to be at least something that you like. And again, with the interactive exhibits, with people putting on displays, and doing things like apparently having different jousting events and things like that, apparently. I didn't get to see any of those because the day I was on, they were only doing the HEMA displays, the actual sort of sword fighting techniques in their little ring, but apparently there are other items and things going on there as well. So again, there's plenty to do there and plenty to see. So yes, my personal recommendation is, although there are other museums internationally that clearly do have good arms and armour exhibits, I would certainly count the Royal Armouries in Leeds amongst them as well. Very fascinating stuff, and hope that you guys get the chance to see such things, because honestly, it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences where you're not going to regret it. Again, if you have even the slightest interest in military, like guns, swords, knives, armour, go to one of these museums and you won't regret it. So that's it for now, and see you later.